Good morning, everyone. My name is Padmini Rana Singh. I'm actually in Baltimore, Maryland. So my time is 11 p.m. here. So I'm a graduate of Colombo Medical School, now live in the US and work at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. So I have the great honor and privilege to introduce my friend, Dr. Ankush Bansal. So mine is very short. He's the one going to give the lecture. So first of all, I would like to mention our topic is climate change and health. This is an inaugural lecture of lecture series. So he's going to do the first lecture as a baseline and foundation. So our plan is to continue to do monthly lectures on this topic. And this has become so important for all the doctors and also any other public health officials and students and residents. About Dr. Ankush Bansal. So I've known him for a long time with involvement in American Medical Association. He has a lot of accomplishment and achievement, but I'm going to highlight some of the important things that's relevant to our topic here. So he did his undergraduate at Virginia Commonwealth University, all in the US, and then a medical degree at Creighton University in Nebraska. After that, he completed his internal medicine residency in Delaware, and currently is enrolled in MPH program at Yale School of Public Health. And he's really big into advocacy, public policy, and health policy, and very involved in organized medicine. He's the president of Florida chapter in American College of Physicians, and then also co-founder and co-chair of Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, and vice president of Florida chapter in Physicians for Social Responsibility, and also a national board member at that organization. Has been there for a very long time in DC, in Washington, DC. And then also vice chair for American College of Preventive Medicine Advocacy Committee. So we both also go to preventive medicine conferences and meetings. That's another place that we work together. And then we definitely work together at American Medical Association. And he's also a member of Council on Science and Public Health, where also I'm part of that. And these are elected positions. And then he represents Florida Medical Association. So he's delegate to American Medical Association House of Delegates. And very important here to mention, he's quite active at World Medical Association. He's the chair of Environment Work Group, and also delegate to co-chair to the COP meetings. It's a climate international meetings, and he represents the WMA. And then right now, actually, he's speaking from Baku, where the meeting is held this year. And actually, he's in Sri Lankan time, although he's from Florida. The other thing I know about him is he's a advocate for lifestyle medicine. So he's a vegan, and they know he likes to travel. So I think without further information, I would like to turn over to Dr. Bansal. So if there's any technical difficulty during this process, because he's in Baku, not sure about the internet, so he will rejoin and then we'll continue. So over to Dr. Bansal. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Padmini. Good morning. As Padmini had mentioned, my name is Ankush Bansal. I'm an internal medicine physician in Florida in USA. I'm currently at...
now I can see. Okay, good.
Currently, I am at the COP29 meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan. This is an international climate conference that is hosted by the United Nations. So there are member states from all over the world, as well as civil society. So today I am just going to give a very brief overview of climate change and health. Specifically, what is climate change and why, and how is it human caused? How does it affect health? Why should we as clinicians, doctors and nurses care, and what can we do? What has been done so far in advocacy and what still needs to be done? So, climate change is what happens when you release a lot of greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are mostly carbon dioxide, but they may also be from nitrates, from ozone, from sulfur-containing materials, and most of these actually come from industrial processes. So this means coal plants, land transport, agriculture, industrial process, and oil production. Number one is oil and gas production because that releases the carbon into the atmosphere. So this graph shows how the global surface temperatures have been increasing from 1880 until 2019. So this is pre-COVID. So you can see this graph showing that as time has gone on, particularly since the end of World War II, the rate of temperature rise has gone increasingly up since those years. And this graph shows until around 2019, 2020, where we reached a maximum of about 0.8 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Currently, as of this year, in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which are the scientists that come with the climate projections each year for the United Nations, says that we are approaching now 1.1 degrees Celsius. The target is 1.5 degrees Celsius, and I'll come to that later in the presentation. And that level has been chosen specifically because of the health harms. So as I had mentioned previously, the largest sources of global warming is from burning of fossil fuel. And you can see how many metric tons of carbon have been released into the atmosphere in the last about 150, 170 years. And again, this has increased exponentially since the end of World War II, and it continues to increase. Consequently, if you increase the temperature in the atmosphere, you will increase the land temperature, which we have seen, but this will also increase the ocean temperature. And you can see particularly problematic is the surface to 300 meters, where the temperature is increasing even faster than the deeper levels of the ocean. Why is this important? Because this is important for weather, for climate changes, for the ocean currents, the wind currents, but also the sea life that is in the ocean and the oxygen production that comes from the ocean. The majority of the oxygen in the world comes from the ocean, since the ocean covers about 70% of the earth. And as you can see, half of this increase has occurred in less than 20 years. So just recently, it has gone up even more than it has been before. And so consequently, these are the top 10 cities at risk from sea level rise. You can see that the city closest to where I live in South Florida, Miami, is on this list. That is the most vulnerable city to climate change in the United States. But for this region, the top cities are all in South Asia and Southeast Asia: Kolkata, Mumbai, Dhaka, and then China and Vietnam. So this is a serious problem, especially for South Asia. So this is an example of some of these storms that occur. This happens occasionally in US. And in fact, it has occurred more recently and more frequently, particularly in California, where you get this type of cloud that just dumps water like an ocean. And it really does come down like an ocean falling on the land and where people live. And you may remember this from 2015 in Tamil Nadu, how much floods there were. You may also remember from 2005 or 6, the typhoon and tsunami, which hit southern India and Sri Lanka, and how much damage it caused. These things are happening more frequently all over the world. This happened near where I live just in the last 30 days. There were 2 hurricanes. There is another hurricane that may be coming next week. And the same thing happened in Spain, where in eastern Spain, there have been so many floods, so many deaths because of these heavy rains caused by climate change. And additionally, what happens with the increased heat is that you get melting of ice, especially the glaciers that are in the northern and southern poles. And what this does is this then causes the sea level to rise. So this is a glacier in Greenland in 1935. This is what it is now. No ice. Same time of year. And this graph shows how much of the ice is decreasing just in Greenland. Same thing is happening in Antarctica. You may see the news every 1 or 2 years where they talk about a large ice mass as big as a country cracking and breaking off or potentially starting to melt. This causes sea level rise, which then affects the coastal cities where the majority of the world's population lives. This graph shows what is the effect of 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees increase in temperature according to the IPCC. And you can see that 2 degrees Celsius, which is likely where the world is headed. In fact, the latest IPCC report from just less than 2 months ago said that instead of targeting for 1.5, we should target for 2 and probably higher, and that at the current rate, by the year 2100, we may reach 3.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But just 2 degrees Celsius above industrial levels shows that 2.6 times worse impact from extreme heat, 10 times the impact on melting of the ice. But then look at the species lost, 2 to 3 times worse just from 2 degrees Celsius increase. And then looking at the land and the oceans, again, between 2 to 3 times worse, just from 2 degrees increase in the temperature. Here's another picture showing the carbon footprint, how this affects or how different industries affect our carbon emissions. You can see that number 1 is industry, number 2 is energy, number 3 is transport, and number 4 is agriculture. So these are the targets of how we mitigate the carbon emissions and consequently climate change. So now I'm going to move on to what are the health effects. That was all about mitigation. Now I will be talking about adaptation because that's what we do in the medical and public health space is the adaptation. So these are 2 graphs that we created in Florida to describe the effects of climate change. On the left, you can see that there are 4 categories of impact: direct impact, spreading of disease, food supply disruption, and well-being disruption. This is primarily emotional stress and psychological stress caused by these other factors. And then on the right, we have this acronym called heat wave, which this is actually very useful because this tells you in broad strokes what are the health effects. So there is heat illness, there's exacerbation of heart and lung conditions such as myocardial infarction, heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma, as well as kidney disease. Asthma, T traumatic, especially from things like typhoons. W is waterborne and foodborne diseases, then allergies, then vector-borne diseases, and lastly, emotional stress. Another graph showing the same thing, just in a different format. I talked about the heat illness, but one of the other things that wasn't mentioned in the previous graph is the environmental degradation. This is down here, and this shows that this is what can happen. You can have forced migration, civil conflict, as well as mental health impacts. So this migration that is happening all over the world, obviously part of it is from political instability and wars, but a large part is directly from climate. In fact, you may know that the first climate refugees from a country have already started migrating to Australia from Vanuatu. The Australian government has accepted refugees from the Vanuatu government because Vanuatu is almost close to disappearing in the next 50 years, if not sooner. So let me first talk about heat illness. What are the signs of heat stroke? And this will be really the only slide where I go more in depth into the medical aspects, at least for this presentation. So there are 3 stages of heat illness. The first is heat cramps. This is when you have heavy sweating with loss of water and salt, but you may also have leg and abdomen pain with spasms. That's heat cramps. Stage 2 is heat exhaustion. This is where you get significant loss of fluid, leading to headaches, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, exhaustion, and more sweating. However, in heat exhaustion, your body temperature, unless you have some infection, remains normal. The third stage and the most serious stage is heat stroke. This is when the body temperature rises, usually above 40 degrees Celsius, risking brain damage or death. The symptoms are confusion, hallucination, rapid breathing, rapid weak pulse, seizure, loss of consciousness, and most important, there's no more sweating because your body cannot handle this, and so there's no more sweating. This is a medical emergency. Now going on to the determinants of health. This is not specific for climate change. This is for all diseases, and you may have seen something similar to this before, that the determinants of health are majority social and economic, as well as health behavior. The physical environment itself, genes and biology and clinical care are just 30%. This is very, very important to address the effects of climate change because this is from social, economic, and to a lesser extent, health behavior. So this graph shows the tropical diseases that have been on the move for so again, pre-world has chikungunya, Chagas disease, and dengue. In fact, in Florida, where I am from, with the hurricane that we had, the second hurricane that we had just 2 weeks ago, there was so much flooding that there was actually an outbreak of dengue in USA, in Florida. So this affects both the rich countries and the low and middle income countries as well. And this will continue and this will likely worsen. Most at risk. The people that are most at risk are those that have disabilities, those that are pregnant, and those who are already ill or have chronic illness. Second group that is most affected are those that are poor, displaced, or are homeless. Then children and the elderly. Children, because they are very sensitive because of their small size and their developing bodies, and elderly because they are more susceptible to heat and illness. They don't often recognize when they have thirst. They may have difficulty in using the bathroom or getting the urge to use the bathroom, and they may have mobility issues. Fourth category of people that are at risk are those that work outdoors. So those that work in construction, those that work in agricultural fields, those that must work outside for other professions, such as police and fire brigade. Those type of people are also at risk. And then lastly, are athletes. This includes school age, as well as amateur and professional athletes. Another graph showing the effects of climate change on physical, mental, and community health. So on the medical and physical health, many of you have already seen these type of things where this can affect fitness level, allergies, vector-borne diseases, infectious disease, chronic disease such as heart, lung, and kidneys. But then also don't forget about mental health. This can increase stress, anxiety, and depression, particularly if there is a climate-caused disaster. This can strain social relationships, so marriages can be affected. This can affect family relationships, as well as relationship between parents and children. This can lead to increased substance use disorder because of the aforementioned stress. And for those people that have suffered things like hurricanes or typhoons, floods, landslides, those type of things, they can have post-traumatic stress disorder, which you know, can cause long-lasting effects. And then there are effects on community health. For example, crime and stress from where the people will find a job, social instability, community instability, and people moving away from the communities, migrants. And so then this decreases the community cohesion. So all of these are affected by climate change, and all of these are health. Taking a more broader approach on planetary health, we are not alone in how climate affects us as humans. We are interrelated with all of the life on Earth. We are related directly with the Earth. And so all of these effects of climate change affect biodiversity, land use, water use, air. They affect the resources that we have, whether it's for food or shelter or industry. And so then these will then also be affected by politics, by aggregation of wealth by some people, by what industries are in power. And so then all of these together will affect our health, from infectious disease, the chronic diseases, displacement, nutrition, etc. Um, the co-chair of the Lancet Commission back in 2015 made this very profound quote that climate change is a medical emergency. It still is. I heard David Boyd, who is the United Nations Rapporteur for Children, Environment, and Health, speak at last year's COP. And he said that the climate crisis, which is a term I like to use, is not only a health crisis, but is a human rights crisis. So that's what I like to use, climate crisis is a health crisis and a human rights crisis. So what can be done? What is being done? Since I'm at COP, I will just briefly discuss the history of what the COP meetings are, how they formed, what has been done so far, and what remains to be done. So the first COP meeting was held in 1995 in Berlin. This is when they started creating these type of agreements. And the first meeting was leading to the Kyoto Protocol, which was at COP3 in 1997. What this was binding emission reduction targets for the developed countries. The problem with this Kyoto Protocol was that it was binding. And so the rich countries, the so-called developed countries, they did not like the binding emission reduction targets. And so many countries did not sign on to this. This then led on to changing this to subsequent years. In COP8 in 2002, there was the Delhi Declaration, and this was for poverty eradication and sustainable development. This then led to a clean development mechanism next year under the Kyoto Protocol. But really, what really improved this was in leading up to 2015, which I'll get to in a minute. But in the meantime, they had the adaptation fund. They had the understanding that they need to limit the global temperature rise to 2 degrees. This was in 2019 in Denmark. Creation of the Green Climate Fund the next year to help the developing countries in adaptation and mitigation. And then leading up to 2015 at COP21, and the famous Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, what this was to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees and limit it to 1.5 degrees. This Paris Agreement is what is the current standard among all of the nations that have signed on to this. And currently, I believe all countries in the world have signed on to the Paris Agreement except maybe 1 or 2. As you know, United States had signed on to Paris Agreement. Donald Trump had taken us out in January of 2017. And then we came back into it, into the Paris Agreement. We will see what will happen next year, but currently the United States is in the Paris Agreement. And part of what this requires is that every 5 years, there is a nationally determined contribution report from every country sent to the United Nations for review to evaluate the progress of that country towards meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. So the next set of NDCs will start coming out next year in 2025. In COP27 in Egypt, where I was also present, there was a creation of a loss and damage fund to support vulnerable countries affected by climate change and to call for mitigation ambition. And then last year was very, very important because it was the first time that there was a health ministerial. So the ministers of health from all over the world descended onto the COP meeting and met in one large auditorium to discuss what can be done from a health aspect. In addition, there was a call for phase out of fossil fuels. We came very, very close, but instead there will be a gradual decline of fossil fuels for the next few decades. And that was the compromise that was made. COP29 is currently happening in Azerbaijan. The main goal here is for a climate finance action fund. So we'll see what happens with that. We are just completing the first of 2 weeks of COP29, so we'll see what the final result is. And this, I was mentioning about phasing out fossil fuels. It was interesting because it caught the attention of OPEC and all of the OPEC nations. While we were at the meeting last year in Dubai, this letter was sent by the Secretary General of OPEC to all of the OPEC Plus nations, basically saying that please defeat the complete phase out of fossil fuels because this would affect them. And in their opinion, it should focus more on emissions than actual production. Which I and many others in the health community, as well as other sectors, disagree with, that it must include both production and emissions. So as I mentioned, I'm currently at COP29 as part of the World Medical Association delegation. These are the other members of World Medical Association who are acting as delegates to COP29. So we have our past president, who is from Kuwait. We have Dr. Surya Kanta from India, from Austria, from Mexico, Egypt, and India, currently in Netherlands. At World Medical Association, we have already written several policies on climate change and health. We are working on revising some of these policies and filling in gaps. But these are some of the ones that I list here. Most important is in 2009, the WMA Declaration of Delhi on Health and Climate, as well as divestment on fossil fuels and resolution on climate energy. And then the most recent ones was resolution of protecting the future generations' right to live in a healthy environment. And this is related to a law that was passed in Scotland maybe 3-4 years ago that says that every future law in the country of Scotland must take into account how it will affect future generations. And that can mean can be climate related, medical related, even finance related. So what more needs to be done? We need more education, particularly for doctors, nurses, pharmacists, technicians, and health administrators. One of the groups that is doing a lot of work on this is the Columbia University in New York, Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education. And what they provide is coursework to any institution or student or practicing physician in the world. They also provide networking and opportunities for research and curriculum development. So I went on the website and I looked at what are the member institutions, and you can see University of Jaffna is actually one of the medical schools that is a member institution of GCCHE. There is also the Planetary Health Alliance, which you can see at the top here is consortium of 450 universities and NGOs to understanding and addressing the global environmental change and its health impacts. So, as I had said at the beginning, we need to focus on both the mitigation and the adaptation. In healthcare, we are on a daily basis taking care of the adaptation and the education of our patients. But we also need to be active in the mitigation, because this is as if we are mopping the floor of water. That's the adaptation, but we are not turning off the tap so that the water does not overflow. That is the mitigation. That is from the oil and gas sector, coal, all of these fossil fuels that are burning, putting out carbon, causing these climate change effects. And while we still need to do more research on the effects on health, we already have a lot of research. We have a lot of data from all over the world, including in specific areas. There is data even within just a few miles of where I live in Florida of the effects of climate change, because we have a lot of sugarcane plantations there, and the burning of the sugarcane causes the air pollution and affects the local people there. And we have the evidence that on those days that they burn the sugarcane near where I live, the rates of asthma and chronic pulmonary disease and heart failure increase. People cannot go to school, they cannot go to work. And when the burning has ended for the season, then within a few days, those rates of hospitalizations come back down to baseline. So it is very clear there's a correlation to the burning of the sugarcane because causing climate change and air pollution. So we know what to do. What will we do it though? Will we work towards advocacy? Will we work towards education? Will we work towards telling our policymakers at the local and the national and the international levels that we need to address this from a health perspective? And the final quote that I'll leave you is from Dr. Rudolf Virchow, who all of us likely studied in school. And he said this very important quote. He said, "Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a large scale. Medicine as a social science, as the science of human beings, has the obligation to point out problems and to attempt their theoretical solution. The politician, the practical anthropologist, must find the means for their actual solution, but the physicians are the natural attorneys of the poor, and the social problems fall to a large extent within their jurisdiction." Thank you so much, and I will take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bansal. It was a great overview. I think I'm sure everyone realized he's an expert in this field internationally. So we are glad to have you for this first session. So I think we have some of the questions came through before the meeting. So I can summarize. You actually touch on so many of those topics, but particularly asking about this chronic diseases increase because of the climate change. And then one of the questions were, are there any innovative strategies in development that could help address these health burdens in a sustainable way?
Yes. So for the chronic diseases, the first way, especially for those that are either elderly or those who may not be elderly but have, let's say, chronic kidney disease, or they have congestive heart failure, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is number one, to educate the patients on how to understand what the weather forecasts are, either on your app or that you see on the TV or the radio or the newspaper, what it means when the temperature is high, what a heat index means, what are the dangers of a heat index, let's say going above 40 degrees Celsius, how to protect themselves from air pollution, for example, to wear a mask, to go inside when the air quality will be very high. So that's one of the other things that you will see in the forecast. And then the most important thing is to have access to water and shade. That is very, very important, especially for those with chronic diseases. And if they or their family members notice any signs of heat illness that I had mentioned, or that they are having difficulty with edema or with breathing, that may occur whether or not there is effects of climate change, that they need to see their doctor or go to the hospital immediately. Those are the important things. On air quality, I did not mention it in the presentation, but that is another thing to monitor. So generally, it is a number that starts from 0 and can go up from there. On average, the lower limit of what is considered healthy is an air quality index of 300. Above 300 is dangerous. Ideally, you want it to below 100, but definitely above 300 is dangerous. If you remember just last week or the week before in Lahore, air quality was 700.
Mhm.
In India right now, air quality is so bad that the schools are closed. They're telling people to stay home because the air quality is so bad. That will directly affect asthma and COPD, heart and lungs. That is something that we can educate our patients on. Um, for those women that are pregnant or may become pregnant, this is also very important because it has been shown in the literature that air pollution, high heat, and lack of water can affect the baby and lead towards intrauterine growth retardation. It can lead towards prematurity. It can lead towards birth defects as well. So those are all things that we as physicians need to educate our patients on and to keep a close eye on for our patients when they come to see us for follow-up visits.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then somebody also asking, do you have like a quantified like the chronic disease burden from climate? Is there a resource? I know you may not be able to tell everything about every disease here, but like what is the if you want to go to one source to like get information about the like increased percentage on different non-communicable or chronic disease, do you recommend anything?
Yeah, so the problem with quantifying it uh, or saying that it is a cause of climate change is very difficult. There is not good evidence of that because we don't have enough data. The problem is when somebody comes in with congestive heart failure, is it because of their diet? Is it because of medicines? Or is it because of climate change? Or is it a combination? It's very difficult to separate those. So we don't know that it is specifically caused by climate change. We just know that there's a correlation on specific events that happen in climate change, for example, hurricanes/typhoons, or on high heat days or flooding. That's all we can say for that.
Association, right? More than
Right,
causality. Okay.
right.
And then the other ones actually you mentioned already, mental health and respiratory illnesses and dengue. And is there a questionnaire to assess or tool to assess individual air pollution level? Do you know of any of those?
Um, from an individual level, I don't know of any questionnaire to address that. What I would recommend is um, to do the normal evaluation of those people
Mhm.
who are at risk of health effects from air pollution, such as asthma and COPD, but also look at what the local weather reports are, what the local climate is, and then also look at what is the baseline increase in those diseases in any particular area. So let's say that in the capital, it is X percent of the rate of the population, but then if you go to some rural area, it's much less. Clearly, it's much higher in the city than in the rural area in that example. But that's all I'm aware of for those kind of things. Yeah.
I think there's a follow-up question on the chat. Do you think that any of the aforesaid measures would ever see ultimate mitigation of climate change adverse effect until population growth is addressed? Kind of a two, three parts question.
Yeah, that is a difficult question to answer. Um, I think that population is a significant part of that. Um, but I think it's a combination of not just the population numbers, but also what these growing populations, how these growing populations are living. So as the wealth of many parts of the world increase, many of these populations, for example, in India and China, for example, um, are wanting to live more like in the Western world, which means more use of cars, more use of air conditioning, more or less physical activity, more eating of meat and carbon intensive foods. So I think all of these play a factor in this, but yes, population is definitely a factor in that.
But we also in a population crisis, some people might say, right? I mean, there's a decreased population overall in
Right.
general.
Right. Yeah.
But
My fear is that as the climate crisis worsens, um, it may indirectly take care of some of the population because it'll be so severe that I think so many people will be affected that it'll cause widespread death and famine.
and I'm going back to the all questions they sent, and then any other AI research that might help for this climate adaptation or mitigation.
Specifically for AI, I'm sure it can help with some of the analysis. I haven't seen any recent information on direct effects. However, just keep in mind that AI is a very, very carbon intensive
Mhm.
technology. It uses a lot of energy. AI and cryptocurrency use a lot of energy because of the computational power required. So much so that many of these technology companies in the west coast of California, for example, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they are now wanting to own their own small nuclear power
Mhm.
reactors to power AI. And yes, nuclear power is carbon neutral, but do we want to trade the carbon emissions for now? Where do we put the nuclear waste? So AI may help, but may also be a problem.
And then I don't know how long we might have, but the next question is this electric vehicles, and then might help us mitigate this. I'm just paraphrasing. And then also electric vehicles. And then how about the solar power is limited and fuel has to be produced, the electricity deficit. If you could address that, what is the impact of electric vehicles?
Yeah, so electric vehicles, I would say is much better than the internal combustion engine vehicles, the standard vehicles, because they do not produce any carbon emissions in the operation. Yes, there is an issue of sourcing the minerals and the metals to create the batteries, and that can be carbon intensive. But I would say overall, it's an improvement on the carbon neutrality. Um, the really what needs to be done for transport is to get away from car culture. And I'm speaking as coming from America, where we're very heavily car culture dependent and going more towards public transport, which even if you use combustion engines will be less carbon intensive because you can transport so many more people or to, especially in the cities, make it more walkable so that people will walk to more places which is also good for health anyways. But in the meantime, I would say electric vehicles are far superior in terms of the climate than the standard combustion engine cars. As far as solar, the price of solar has dropped significantly just in the last 10 years to the point that in some parts of the world, it is about as economical as using fossil fuels for electricity generation. Um, uh, the issue is more production and distribution of those.
On the chat, very loaded question. Have they found a way to reduce air pollution in 2024? So I think it's a collective work, right? We all have to contribute, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. We haven't figured out how to functionally reduce it. We know one of the primary ways to reduce it, and that's to get away from fossil fuels. So oil, gas, coal, um, those kind of dirty fuels, and including natural gas. So you may hear that, oh well, natural gas or compressed gas or any kind of gas, it is cleaner, quote cleaner, but it produces carbon emissions. In fact, there was a study, I think 6 months ago, that they did in Delhi, looking at either Delhi or Mumbai, I forget, where they looked at the emissions from standard combustion engines, particularly in the city buses, versus the natural gas buses. And they said there was no statistically significant difference in the carbon emissions.
And next one is on the chat. Western world contribute a lot, right? Where everyone has to suffer. So the question particularly asking, powerful developed countries are evolving for environmental pollution in various manner. Example, a lot of flights, every minute there's a flight in the sky. Are there any steps taken in regulations to, limit those? I would say, like, in generally speaking, Western world contribute what type of rules and regulations they have.
So yes, it is coming from the developed world, the Western countries. They actually produced the overwhelming majority of the pollution in the world, even more than China and India, which are the second and third. And the rest of the world, particularly the global South, are the ones that are feeling the most significant effects of this. Um, the Western world is not really doing much about that, because they don't want to change their way of life and they don't want to help fund the adaptation and for the global South and the low and middle income countries. As far as the flights, yes, absolutely, 100%. Thousands of flights. As far as rules in USA, no. And it will likely get worse starting in January with our new president. Um, the only place where I've seen that there's restrictions or talk about restrictions on flights is in France. France has now a new law or regulation limiting short distance flights. How much of an effect that will make, I don't know. But the other thing is France also has excellent train systems, so you don't really need the flights in that case.
And then we have, I guess this is the last question. How effective the seasonal influenza vaccine in climate change? I'm not sure what the exact question is, but that's the question. How effective the seasonal influenza vaccine in climate change?
What vaccine? I'm sorry.
Influenza, flu vaccine.
Oh. I mean, influenza vaccine, I don't think will affect climate change. The difference is if you have any kind of acute or chronic respiratory disease, then air pollution will affect you more. In fact, there were studies that showed that those people who were suffering the effects of air pollution were more susceptible to COVID during the public health emergency, the global public health emergency, and they often had more severe disease. But there was also confounding because those people often lived in low and middle income countries, again, most affected by climate change, and they may have had poor nutrition as well. So, but yes, if you have any kind of infection or respiratory disease, you will definitely feel the effects of air pollution more.
And then
And then,
I
oh,
think
is
chat.
cholera caused by
Yeah,
pollution?
exactly. That's those two
Um,
questions.
yeah, cholera, I guess it can be, like, for example,
Spread.
from fertilizer runoff, from agricultural misuse. You can get too much nutrients in the water, and then you have sewage going in the water, and so you can get more increase in cholera. Um, I wouldn't say that cholera is directly caused by pollution, but it may increase the
Mhm. Spread.
distribution of the cholera cases. Yeah,
And especially if you're living in that like after a climate crisis type of a event, tsunami or something, then it gets spread, right? Those are like indirectly probably related to a
correct.
climate,
Yeah.
right? And do you see, Ankush, the next question, wouldn't lifestyle changes, including reduction in advertising and modernized living,
Of
countries in
course.
this?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Lifestyle changes are a big thing. So, there are 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. The top 2 are diet and exercise. So if we didn't depend on cars or any vehicles and we walked more, that would improve our health, but it would also decrease the carbon emissions because we're not using these carbon intensive products either through emissions or the production of those vehicles. And then the other thing is, if we ate more plant-based food, that agriculture is far less carbon intensive, land usage, and water usage than eating meat. So yes, lifestyle changes will definitely have an effect. Will it be sufficient to reverse climate change? No. But will it have an effect? Yes. And then as far as leisure and recreation sector, yes, again, air conditioning, staying indoors all the time, having to travel by vehicle, even a short distance rather than walking or using public transit. Yes, yes.
I think we have completed all the questions we have on the chat and then pre-sent questions. I think I don't know if anything else we need to address here, but I see for the audience there's a e-certificate form listed there on the chat. I think I heard Dr. Bansal, for you, they would like to collaborate and future. If you can participate in the events, that'd be great because everyone kind of liked it. So with
Okay.
that, I think thank you very much for participating. Big round of applause to Dr. Bansal. Despite being in another place, he just did this lecture for us. Thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. And I hope this was very helpful for people. I know this was very brief overview, but I can go into a lot more clinical detail on specific areas in future lectures. So, for example, heat illness, or on the effects of algae blooms, which I've seen, air pollution. So we can go into detail in separate individual lectures as well.
Yeah, that is the purpose. This is like a more foundation. You talk about like a high level, and then that would help, figure out what the next steps and the lectures or any other events we may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you
I'm
so much,
going to,
everybody.
leave here. So thanks. Have a great day. Bye.
All right. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.